A town that trades men like tools rarely expects a miracle. Yet on a dust-choked October afternoon, one widow risks her last coins on a stranger with storm-grey eyes. What begins as a desperate bargain will test pride, grief, and the fragile hope of surviving winter. The October sun poured down like molten lead over Mercy Ridge, turning the dust of the main street into a suffocating haze that clung to the skin like a guilty conscience. Eleanor Tate adjusted the shawl around, her shoulders not out of modesty, but from the desperate need to hide the unmistakable curve of her belly. 8 months had passed since Jonathan died, and 7 since she learned she would not face the coming winter alone. Rough male voices rolled across the square, as weathered as old leather, mingling with the clink of coins and the occasional restless whinny of horses. The monthly labor auction had begun without her. Eleanor knew the strongest men were already taken. Desperation, whether buying or selling, always arrived late. "Mama, why is everyone staring?" Mabel whispered, pressing her small hand into the folds of Eleanor's skirt. Her blue eyes, so painfully like Jonathan's, made every turning face sting a little more. "Because we're different." "Sweetheart," Eleanor replied, lifting her chin though each glance weighed on her shoulders like stones. Being different, she reminded herself, did not mean being wrong. A crowd pressed around the makeshift platform, where Silas Ban presided as auctioneer, his oily voice sliding over the square like grease on water. Eleanor knew him too well. He was the one who had persuaded Jonathan to sign those papers, filling his head with promises of prosperity that had curdled into debts now, threatening to strip her of everything left. Sheriff Darnell's voice made her start. The older man approached, removing his hat with respect, though concern clouded his eyes. "Didn't expect to see you here."
"Hard times call for hard choices."
"Sheriff," Eleanor answered, watching men on the platform assessed like livestock. Some stood tall, clinging to scraps of pride, others hunched, beaten by circumstance. Darnell nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to Mabel, then to Eleanor's belly. "If you need anything, anything at all." "I need what's up there," she said, nodding toward the platform. "A strong back and willing hands. Nothing more." He didn't look convinced, but he stepped away, casting a wary glance at Silas Ban, who had already noticed Eleanor, and now watched her with a smile that never touched his eyes. The auction rolled on, one man after another claimed by farmers, traders and ranchers who could afford extra help. Eleanor counted the few coins she'd scraped together by selling Jonathan's books, her mother's china, anything not vital to survival. When only 3 men remained, hope slipped through her fingers like dry sand. The last ones were always trouble, drunkards, cripples, or worse. Then Ban called the next name. Calder Briggs, 30, 5 cavalry veteran, ranch and construction experience. The man who stepped forward stole Eleanor's breath. Tall and broad-shouldered, yet bent as if carrying the world's weight. His clothes were clean but patched, his beard rough but unable to hide the hard line of his jaw. What struck her most were his eyes, grey as a thunderhead and utterly devoid of expectation. Fresh cuts marked his knuckles, and he favored his left hand, an old injury that never healed right. Still, there was something in the way he stood, scanning the crowd without challenge yet without surrender, that suggested he had known better days. "Do I hear a bid?" Ban called, contempt threading his tone. Reliable worker, though with his peculiarities. Silence stretched. Eleanor watched the subtle tightening in Calder's shoulders. He expected this. He understood rejection. $10. Her voice cracked the air like a whip. The crowd turned in unison. Ban blinked, disbelief flickering across his face. "Beg your pardon, Mrs. Tate?" $10 for Mr. Briggs's labor through spring," she repeated, steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Farm work, repairs, whatever keeps the place running." She paused, meeting Calder's gaze for the first time. Whispers spread like brushfire. A woman in her condition, what would the pastor say? But she did not look away. "Any higher bid?" Ban asked with a cruel curl of his lips. "Any good soul willing to save the widow from her foolishness?" Silence answered. Heat crept up Eleanor's neck, but her chin stayed high. "Sold to Mrs. Eleanor Tate," Ban announced, striking the table. May God help you both. Eleanor walked to the platform with measured steps, Mabel clinging like a shadow. Calder descended, canvas bag in one hand, hat in the other. Up close, she saw deep lines etched at the corners of his eyes and scars, disappearing beneath his collar. His hands were large and calloused, yet surprisingly careful with the few belongings he carried. "Mr. Briggs," Eleanor said, passing the coins to Ban without breaking eye contact. "I'm Eleanor Tate. This is my daughter Mabel." Calder inclined his head first to Eleanor, then to Mabel, who hid deeper in her mother's skirt. "Ma'am, miss." His voice was low, roughened by disuse but laced with respect she hadn't expected. "Thank you for the opportunity." "It isn't charity," she replied too quickly, catching the flicker of steel in his eyes. "It's honest work for honest pay. My farm's 3 miles north. The house needs repairs before winter, and the fields must be ready for spring." Calder nodded once, sharp and certain. "Understood, Mrs. Tate." Ban's voice cut in, and Eleanor felt Calder stiffen beside her, though he didn't move. "Hope you know what you're doing." A man with Mr. Briggs' reputation might not be suitable company for a lady in your delicate state. Anger rose bitter in Eleanor's throat. "My circumstances are my business, Mr. Ban," she said. "My decisions don't require your approval." Ban smiled like a predator scenting weakness. "Of course. I only worry for your welfare, Eleanor, and your family, especially considering the debts your husband left behind." The silence that followed hung thick as syrup. Eleanor felt the ground tilt, the world losing its firmness beneath her feet. Beside her, Calder's attention sharpened, focused like a blade. "Those debts will be handled," she managed, her voice distant even to her own ears. "Naturally," Ban murmured. "If you ever need a more permanent solution, you know where to find me." Eleanor took Mabel's hand and headed for the wagon at the end of the street, acutely aware of Calder's quiet presence beside them, of the eyes tracking their departure, of words left unsaid until they were out of earshot. The ride home passed in taut silence, broken only by the creak of wheels and Mabel's soft humming. Eleanor felt the man behind them without turning. His long legs hung over the wagon's edge, and she knew his eyes scanned the landscape like a seasoned scout measuring threats. When they reached the Tate farm, pride and shame mingled in her chest. The house was sturdy, built by Jonathan's hands from oak and love. Yet time and neglect had taken their toll. The porch boards bowed, shingles were missing, the barn door sagged on one hinge. Calder climbed down unaided despite the stiffness in his shoulder and stood surveying the property with the same quiet attentiveness he'd shown all day. "The barn can wait until morning," Eleanor said into the silence. "There's a small room in the back. Not much, but it's clean and warm. More than I've had in a long while," he answered. And something in his tone made her look closer, gratitude edged with a resignation she recognized in herself. Mabel ran to the porch, then paused to glance back at the stranger her mother had brought home. Her curious eyes met Calder's, and Eleanor held her breath. He removed his hat and bowed with solemn courtesy, like a knight before a queen. "Miss Mabel," he said gently, "I hope we'll be good friends." She didn't reply, but she didn't hide either, tilting her head in shy imitation before disappearing inside. Eleanor felt a tension loosen in her chest, one she hadn't known she carried. "Supper's at 6, she said. "We don't have much, but there's always enough for one more." Calder nodded, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "Mrs. Tate, is there anything that needs doing first?" Eleanor looked over the broken fence, the leaning barn, the fields awaiting winter's bite. There was so much to mend she hardly knew where to begin. "Survive the winter," she said at last. "We'll handle the rest as it comes." Calder studied her face a long moment, and she had the uneasy sense he saw more than she intended. The fatigue etched around her eyes, the fear she hid from Mabel, the constant weight that had followed Jonathan's death. "We'll manage," he said quietly, a calm certainty in his voice that made her believe, for the first time in months, she might not face the cold season alone. Watching him head toward the back of the house to settle into his new room, Eleanor wondered what she had truly seen in that stranger on the dusty square that made her risk her last coins. As the sun dipped behind Mercy Ridge, painting the sky in gold and crimson, she allowed herself to think that perhaps, just perhaps, she had made the right choice. Winter arrived quietly, not with a storm but with a steady hush that settled over the Tate farm like a held breath. By the time the first hard frost silvered the fields, the barn stood firm. The roof no longer wept in the night, and laughter, rare, fragile, but real, had found its way back into the house. Calder never spoke much about his past, and Eleanor never pressed. Some wounds, she knew, healed best in silence. What mattered was the rhythm they built together. Shared meals, long days of work, Mabel's small hand tucked into his when they walked the fence line. When the baby came on a pale morning edged with snow, Calder waited outside the room, hat turning slowly in his hands, until Mabel burst out to announce he had a son to meet. He stepped in carefully, as if entering a sacred place, and Eleanor saw in his eyes not the emptiness from the auction, square but something steady and warm. Spring did come, as it always does, but Calder did not leave. One evening, standing beneath a sky soft with thawing light, he simply asked if there might still be work for him beyond the season. Eleanor took his hand, calloused and certain, and answered with a quiet yes that felt less like a decision and more like coming home.